Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited. This is going to be the first in a brief series for our Thursday evening sessions where we kind of talk to more about new technologies, either devices, diagnostic, or treatment focused. And today, really cool, we have Mark Geiger with us from Anuncia Medical, and they have a really cool new tool that is supposed to help with shunt longevity, which is like the holy grail for a lot of CSF disorders. So I'm really, really excited to kind of hear more about it, how it came to be, and see how it can help patients with hydrocephalus or any other potential applications in the future. But for that, to that point, I'm gonna go away for a little bit. Um, Mr. Geiger's going to give his whole spiel and talk a little bit about how he got involved in this in the first place, which is very, very interesting and important. And then I'll come back and we'll do a quick Q&A. If you have questions, put them in the chat. I will field all of them. So take it away.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Caitlin and Mary and the whole Bobby Jones CSF team for the opportunity to speak with you. My name is Mark Geiger, as mentioned at the top. I am living with hydrocephalus, and I'll get into that in a little bit. I'm also the VP Sales and Marketing for Anuncia Medical, headquartered in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we make a product called the ReFlow. Just a little bit about me. I was diagnosed with hydrocephalus at age 14, potentially caused by leftover scar tissue from when I had meningitis when I was younger. I have a VP shunt with occipital placement. It's an older fixed pressure valve from a company that has changed hands a few times, but at the time the name of the company was Holter Hausner. Many of you may know John Holter built one of the first shunts to help try to save his son about 70 years ago, and his name is all over hydrocephalus and the VP shunting or hydrocephalus shunting world. So I had my first shunt procedure. I was diagnosed on a Friday night and implanted on a Saturday morning after a lot of attempts at trying to figure out what was causing all of the headaches and lethargy, etc. That procedure was done at Long Beach Memorial in Southern California. And then I went on to have 5 shunt revisions all throughout high school to replace occluded ventricular catheters or blocked ventricular catheters, which for many, many decades has been the only way to fix a shunt is by doing a surgical procedure. So my presentations, everybody is different, but my presentations were severe headache, waking up in the middle of the night, screaming, having my parents put me in the car and taking me to the hospital where I'd, wake up in the ER and have a shunt surgery. So there I am in after my first shunt surgery in 1982, and then 1986. You can't see it because it's not a very good picture, but I'm missing some hair there on the back right side. I did go on to, play some sports and lead a relatively normal life outside of all of the shunt revisions. So this is me today. It's my lovely wife of 25 years, Amy, and my 2 daughters, Mia and Megan, from Mia's high school graduation in June of this year, and we live in Laguna Niguel, California. I've also spent 32 years working with medical devices, instruments, equipment, implants. I worked for one of the first shunt companies called PS Medical in just north of Santa Barbara in Goleta, California. I worked for them directly out of college. It was recommended by my neurosurgeon, Gordon McComb from Children's Hospital of LA. Over the time that I was there, we made shunts, neuroendoscopes, external ventricular drains. We acquired a number of different technologies, including drills and endoscopes, dural substitutes, etc. So over the course of the 32 history, I've spent about 16 years directly hands-on with hydrocephalus, and then a number of different consulting jobs for hydrocephalus. I've got 2 US patents for cerebrospinal fluid filtration to treat neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and MS. And I served on the board of directors of the Hydrocephalus Association for 6 years in the late 90s and early 2000s. My most recent product was the one on the bottom right there. It was an implant called a peripheral nerve stimulator for the treatment of chronic pain with a wearable and a remote control to turn it on and off, which I think is really exciting and can eventually make its way over into managing hydrocephalus as well. The company I work for now that I joined in April of 2023 makes a product called the ReFlow. This is Anuncia Medical located in Scottsdale. And it's circled there on the top right on that image. And it is implanted in between the valve and the part of the ventricular catheter that goes into the ventricles. So in between the valve and the burr hole, whether it's placed frontally or occipitally. It's been in the ReFlow Mini has been implanted in 3 top U.S. hospitals since it launched last month, right after 4th of July, and but the history goes about a decade back with what we call the Gen 1 device, which was much bigger, was implanted in about 35 patients, and after those 35 patients that were implanted in, right before COVID, the company decided to retool the device after feedback from neurosurgeons saying that we needed to make it smaller, and took everything that was good about the ReFlow Gen 1 and built it into what we call the ReFlow Mini Flusher, which you see pictured there with the circle around it. It looks like a reservoir, but it's a flusher, and we'll get into what that is in a second here. So the Gen 1 had about exactly 11 published clinical pieces on it. The most recent being from May of this year in the journal Pediatric Neurosurgery. And as I mentioned, it's 50% smaller than the original, and it's compatible with most commercially available shunts. This is a video that's 1 minute long, 1 minute and 15 seconds, and I'm going to play it for you now that tells you what the ReFlow is.
The newly upgraded ReFlow System Mini brings implanted CSF shunt technologies to the 21st century. It features a novel, inline flusher added to a commercially available shunt to reestablish CSF flow in blocked or occluded ventricular catheters, as well as maintenance flushing to keep shunts flowing. With the simple press of the ReFlow Mini Flusher, ventricular catheter patency may be maintained. The future of hydrocephalus shunting is here. Here's how it works. The novel, specialized ReFlow Mini Flusher is attached in line with the implanted shunt system between the ventricular catheter and the desired shunt valve. The procedure to attach the ReFlow Mini does not significantly alter the shunt implant technique or add significant amount of time. With a simple, deliberate depression of the flusher dome, the small, controlled flush of less than half a milliliter of fluid in the ReFlow Mini Flusher is sent to the ventricular catheter to clear the catheter's inlet flow holes and keep the shunt functional. The ReFlow Mini Flusher keeps shunts flowing.
So that's how it works. Hopefully that was a good description of how the ReFlow Mini Flusher works. And as many of you know, clinical data is the currency of this business and very important in showing safety and efficacy. We do have 510(k) clearance to improve, restore, and maintain CSF flow. The body of clinical work, I mentioned 11 published clinical studies, really talks about the efficacy of the device and its ability when the patient prescribes for the patient or their caregiver to actuate the device non-invasively to keep the flow holes of the ventricular catheter patent or open. With the concept of that many of you have heard, a rolling stone gathers no moss. So the recent study from May for the ReFlow Gen 1 talked about or reported 9 patients who had 14 shunt surgeries in the 2 years prior to ReFlow implant and 1 shunt surgery in the now 3 years after ReFlow implant. So significant reduction. And this is with prescribed by their neurosurgeon daily maintenance flushing that we have FDA clearance for. So I went through all of that kind of quickly. This picture is from myself and Dr. Sam Cheshire at Primary Children's in Salt Lake City, Utah, for the first implant of the ReFlow in the world, or the ReFlow Mini Flusher in the world, for a 16-year-old patient who had chronic occlusions and very small ventricles. And the latest that I've heard, that was July 6th, the latest I've heard from Dr. Cheshire is that the patient is doing well. Before we get to the questions, you can learn more about Anuncia Medical, see the video, hear some of the patient stories at anunciamedical.com. Or if you scan the QR code there, you can go to our Linktree link and see the clinical data and all sorts of resources to help you learn more about the product. With that, I will open it up to questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark. This was really, really cool. And I know that there are a couple of questions that came in earlier, and if anyone has any questions now, you can use the chat function. We can talk about it that way. So I know you talked a little bit about, I'm going to add this question, sorry. You talked about how it works and everything and how there was a first gen. But I kind of wanted to talk more about the history. So how did this technology really come to be? What kind of physicians and researchers were working on this? How did you know that this kind of thing would work, if it truly does? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
It's a great question. The idea came out of Dr. Joe Madsen from Boston Children's, and we licensed the intellectual property from Boston Children's. Dr. Madsen is a very well-respected name in neurosurgery and in pediatric neurosurgery. He's still around and a great man if you ever get a chance to meet him. And this was the original ReFlow Gen 1 was designed as a rescue device, meaning if a patient had an occlusion, the device would only be used when the patient was symptomatic of a shunt occlusion or shunt malfunction, specifically clogging of the ventricular catheter. When we built the device and got it FDA cleared and started implanting it, some of the neurosurgeons who were implanting the device at the time from Boston Children's and Medical University of South Carolina, Children's Hospital of Orange County, etc., said, I don't want to use this as a rescue device. I don't want to wait for the shunt occlusion to happen. What if I train the patients to actuate the device itself daily for maintenance flushing? In the clinical study from May, it uses the word prophylactic flushing, but really our FDA clearance is about maintenance flushing, as trained or prescribed by the neurosurgeon. And so the device evolved from the Gen 1 with a special catheter to be just the flusher by itself, that can be used with any shunt system. And that becomes important because every neurosurgeon has their design that they have been trained to use, they like using, that they feel for their specific patient population works the best. And so the fact that ReFlow works, the ReFlow Mini Flusher works with any shunt system now, for not just rescue flushing, but for maintenance flushing, was a big evolution. And that it doesn't sound like a lot, but that whole evolution took about a decade.
Yeah. There are really good questions coming in the chat. So I'm going to start with the absolute basic that's kind of getting to one of them. What are the indications for this kind of device being implanted?
Well, it's indicated for use with hydrocephalus shunts. So by itself, it's nothing. It only works implanted in line with a hydrocephalus shunt. And the key feature of it is, compared to just a reservoir style device, the ReFlow selectively delivers a calculated amount of CSF directly to the ventricles. Some shunt valves do have a reservoir on them, but if you press that reservoir, the fluid goes both ways. And that fluid that goes downstream past the valve is lost forever because there's a one-way valve in there. The fluid that when you depress the ReFlow Mini Flusher goes directly, all of it goes directly back into the ventricles, And then when you stop pressing the device, it's simply passive flow that doesn't significantly change the performance characteristics of the shunt.
That's great. And then a question was, is this approved only in pediatrics, or is this good for adults in hydrocephalus as well?
Great question. It's approved for both pediatrics and adults. And how young a child is really at the discretion of the neurosurgeon. The profile is about the same as many of the shunt valves in the marketplace. And as I mentioned, that was a big transition from the original Gen 1 device to the ReFlow Mini Flusher, which is taking 50% of the size, taking all the functionality and packing it into a much smaller package, which we did.
Yeah, absolutely. So very logistically and really literally, how would the patient perform the maintenance flush?
What some doctors have done is prescribe and train patients to do 2 flushing sessions. Once in the morning when you wake up, press the device 5 times, letting it refill each time, and then once in the afternoon, pressing it once each time, letting it refill, which takes about 3 to 5 seconds, depending on how much CSF is in the lateral ventricles of the brain. And that's it. The whole process takes about 30 seconds. So 30 seconds in the morning and 30 seconds in the afternoon. We've interviewed a number of parents that have the Gen 1 device, and one of the questions we asked was, well, does it hurt when you depress it? And at least 2 of the moms of young children, these children were in between age 2 and 5. Both mothers said that it didn't hurt them at all. And in one case, the mother said for her child that he learned how to count to 5 with the ReFlow device, which I thought was cute. But I was happy to learn that at least in the parents that we've spoken to, that they reported that it didn't hurt the child when they depressed the device.
That's really good. Really good to hear. This came through the chat. Does activating it, does that need to be prescribed, or can the patient push the button as needed once they're trained? Follow up, does the tiny temporary reverse flow cause any noticeable effect, such as short-term headache? That's actually a separate question. If you want to do the first one.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's as prescribed by the neurosurgeon, and there are a lot of etiologies of hydrocephalus. Some patients have idiopathic hydrocephalus at birth. Sometimes it accompanies spina bifida. Sometimes it's from trauma or hemorrhagic stroke, or a tumor or a cyst inside the CSF spaces. So really only your doctor knows those specific circumstances. I can tell you that in one of the patients, the patient had very small ventricles and only one spot to put the ventricular catheter that you could see on imaging. And the doctor said, you know what, I know there's a lot of tissue in that space, specifically choroid plexus, which is what creates CSF from blood. And he said, I'm not going to wait a week after surgery to tell the patient to flush the device. I'm going to tell them to flush it tomorrow. So there was a very specific case where the neurosurgeon sort of went off of what many of the doctors have done, is to wait a week and then prescribe 2 sessions. He deviated from that because of the patient's very specific circumstances, and only the doctor's going to be able to know that and adjust based on that specific patient's needs.
Yeah. And then I guess we'll do the second question. Does that flow reversal, does that cause any sort of temporary effects like short-term headache? And this will lead into the next.
Great question. So the answer is no. You're delivering a very, very small amount of CS. In fact, we say less than half an ml, or to be more specific, 0.42 ml in each depression. And then after you've pressed and flushed the ventricular catheter, fluid is now egressing out. So when you're refilling the reservoir, you're getting back that fluid that you use to flush the system.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And this kind of follows that question, though. What are any of the other adverse effects that you've noticed with this technology? Have there been any?
Right, it's a great question. The answer is there have been no serious device-related adverse events, to use the language of the industry. We do have FDA clearance, so the FDA cleared the device because it felt it was safe and effective. We did extensive testing on the device so that it could survive, I think it's somewhere between 10 and 11,000. Actually, it's more, no, it's more like it's 100,000 depressions, which would last 10 years of you pressing it multiple times every day. And on top of that, and more importantly maybe, is that we had to do, the FDA asked us to do usability tests, which is, can a patient or their family member read the instructions on how to locate the device and actuate it, and then find it on a model with skin over it and depress the device and do that effectively. And so the FDA asked us to do that testing. We did the usability test, passed with flying colors, and that was a part of our FDA submission. Also, we were asked to do animal work with the catheter implanted inside of a brain and flush the device not inside the ventricles but inside the brain to make sure that it didn't harm brain tissue in any way. So there was extensive work and testing that the FDA asked us to do to get the approval, and then on top of that to get the breakthrough designation from FDA. So we have breakthrough device designation with the ReFlow Mini Flusher.
That's great. Yeah. This is a very good question, actually. Is there any way that the patient would be depressing their valve somehow rather than the ReFlow device? Is that something that you've seen?
That has happened once, and it was, if I remember the story correctly, this was with the Gen 1, and the parents had stepped away, and the grandmother was responsible for doing the flushing while the parents were away, and she was pressing the valve instead of the ReFlow in this case, and that was an N of 1, and that patient, I believe, went on to go and have a revision because they were implanted because they were what we would call a chronic occluder, or somebody who's had multiple revisions because of ventricular catheter occlusion. And then after the next device was implanted, the training was conducted with both the parents and the grandmother, and the patient was doing fine, is doing fine after that now.
That's great. But that does bring up, I know we kind of talked about this, but are there any contraindications? So if you've had X number of shunt revisions, are you not eligible to get this kind of device implanted, or it's just going to benefit if it were to be replaced with your new shunt?
Well, that's a great question. The answer is there are no contraindications other than, if you had a tumor in the region where the device was implanted, or if there was some way that the device would add risk to the implant because of other things, the patient, other conditions or disease states the patient may have, and that's at the discretion of the doctor. But today, we are FDA cleared for use with most/all commercially available hydrocephalus shunts.
That's great. This is another good one. How did you decide that 0.42 milliliter volume was optimal for flushing?
That's a great question. Thank you. So you're trying to use the geometry of the shunt system, and that is the inner diameter of the ventricular catheter. That's all fluid filled in a hydrocephalus shunt, and the amount of pressure that can be generated by depressing the ReFlow. And I'll point out that you have to press the ReFlow with a finger or a thumb with the right amount of force in the right direction to get it to actuate. So for example, it would be nearly impossible to actuate the device by laying your head on a pillow, or even if you had something flat depressing on your head. It has to be pressing in the middle of the flusher with just the right amount of force to actuate the system. Um, so I'm sorry, could you repeat the question one more time? I got off on a tangent there.
No, no, that's great. Hats are okay.
Yeah, hats are
The
okay.
0.42 milliliters. How did you
Yes.
come to
Oh
that
yeah.
figure?
Yeah. So you're using the geometry of the inner diameter of the ventricular catheter and then the capability of the reservoir. So we were able to shrink the size of the flusher down to 50% of what the first design was, and still have enough fluid, less than half an ml, to flush the ventricular catheter and clear occlusions. Now, the question might lead to, well, is this foolproof? And the answer is no. If you have an occlusion that is, very, very bloody CSF from an interventricular hemorrhage or something like that, and you had coagulated blood in the flow holes and throughout the catheter, the reflow may not be able to open that occlusion with severe blood and debris. But it has been tested at a very high level of what clinicians and researchers call protein, which can be translated into blood or debris. So typically, if you've been put in the ICU with an external ventricular drain to reduce the amount of blood in CSF, they use a number of the concentration of 200 micrograms per deciliter of fluid. They want that protein count to be below 200 micrograms per deciliter of fluid. We've tested the reflow up to 900 micrograms per deciliter of fluids, like many of the hydrocephalus shunts have been tested at. So the reflow will work at very high protein counts, but it's not foolproof. One thing to note is, and this is where if you run into this with your device, is that if you can't depress the system, it's not a 100% test for this, but your catheter may be clogged, and that would be a time that you would then contact your neurosurgeon to talk about next steps.
Sure. Yeah. This kind of was my next question. So, what are the limitations of the device? Did you kind of go through them all, or is there any other that maybe you want to mention?
Uh, no, I would just add that the type of questions I alluded to in my earlier slide are the questions that we receive from neurosurgeons is, how come nobody's done this before? And it seems so simple. And how could it take a decade to make something that simple? Well, I think that's the elegant thing about the device, is its simplicity. Is in the era of electronics and the talk of smart shunts and all of these things, I think the really elegant thing about the system is that it's just something that can be added in line, and it can allow the patient and their caregivers, as prescribed by the neurosurgeon, to interact with their device to help keep it working.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. Um, we kind of talked about this. I guess I'll just ask it again for the sake of having it asked, but how many times can the flusher be flushed, and does it need to be replaced? I guess we did talk about that a little.
Yeah, it's been tested to over 100,000 cycles. And how many times it is depressed is as prescribed by your neurosurgeon. I was giving you the anecdote of what a specific doctor from Medical
Mhm.
University of South Carolina prescribes, which is 2 sessions per day, 5 times in the morning, 5 times in the afternoon. And then for some of those patients, if everything continued to work well, he would pull that back to 1 session per day. But it's really not not prescribed or reported by the company at all about the
Right.
product, because we're not physicians. That's a conversation that the patient and their caregivers or family members would have, and to come up with the right number based on the use case.
To that point, what are some of the things that a patient should talk about with their doctor to identify maybe how many of those depressions need to be prescribed? So, how do I explain this? Um, what are some of the characteristics of that person's hydrocephalus that they want their doctor to know, like, this is a problem for me, or something to that effect, so that they can have that discussion in a more educated way.
Right. I think, knowing, I think, knowing the etiology of your hydrocephalus, which your neurosurgeon is going to know about. I talked about some of the causes of hydrocephalus earlier, knowing that, and that might become important if you're transitioning from, you've moved to a different city and you're developing a relationship with the doctor, is to make sure that somebody or that neurosurgeon in the new place that you're living, whether it's next to the college that you've transitioned to, or your family moved to a different place, is to establish that relationship, make sure those records are there, and so that they know, what type of shunt you have. Do you have a ReFlow device implanted? Do they know how to use it? So one example could be if you moved to Skokie, Illinois, and you were all of a sudden partnering with a neurosurgeon who didn't know what ReFlow was. We could help you there. If you call Anuncia, then we could get one of our field members, field team, to contact that neurosurgeon, or we could contact them with your permission to show them the device, say this patient has graduated or transitioned into your area under your care. Let us show you how to use the device.
Yep, that's great. Trying to see here. There are a couple of questions about the peer-reviewed articles on this technology. So I gathered from your presentation a lot of that's done in the Gen 1, because the Mini is
Correct.
brand new, right?
Right.
But are there any findings that maybe, even some citations I could probably include in the notes with this recording, but what are some of the things that, if patients wanted to go on PubMD and kind of take a look, what should they be looking for?
Well, you can, I believe you can see the clinical study from May, at least, through the Linktree link, then the QR code there. But it is the May issue of Pediatric Neurosurgery, where the most recent article was published. It is a peer-reviewed journal, and we don't have any human clinical data on the ReFlow Mini Flusher, which was just launched in July. You're correct in saying that all of those clinical pieces were on the Gen 1. We do have FDA clearance based on all of the work that we did with Gen 1 for the ReFlow Mini Flusher, and we do have plans to do what's called post-market clinical data. In fact, we have a study that is called Socrates, which stands for standard of care, ReFlow, efficacy, and safety, with patients flushing their device every day. We do have plans to do future clinical work, because I think we need to continue to provide evidence, but also to help define, are there specific segments of patient populations that have hydrocephalus that would benefit the best? The one that everybody thinks of now is, what we call the chronic occluders, right? The people who, have had lots of ventricular catheter occlusions. That's sort of a natural, but, are there other specific segments that would do better than others? And that you only can help define that with, usage of the product and robust protocols and published clinical data.
Absolutely. This is a very good question, and it's important to ask. I don't really know how you can definitely answer it, but since the device is FDA approved, what's the likelihood of insurance, or at least Medicare, covering the implantation of the device?
Well, right now, the reimbursement codes for hydrocephalus shunts, this would just fit under the existing DRG code for the implantation of a hydrocephalus shunt. There are 3, and mostly center around, is it just straight hydrocephalus, or are there other comorbidities associated with the hydrocephalus, like from traumatic brain injury or a tumor or a cyst or some of the other things that I've talked about over the course of this presentation, but it is covered under the existing DRG codes that the hospital bills for the implant or revision of a hydrocephalus shunt.
Okay, that's great. I had a question about potential. I know I'm definitely getting ahead of ourselves here. The potential future applications beyond hydrocephalus. Is there anything that Anuncia thinks there might be other CSF disorders that would benefit from this type of technology? Probably not exactly the same, but what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's a great question. I think, we have what I would consider a very well vetted new product pipeline. The place that a lot of doctors seem to go is, hey, could we use this in the ICU? Because we have patients who are externalized for external ventricular drains because they have bleeding in the CSF. And could we use the ReFlow to help clear those blocked ventricular catheters, even though they're externalized? And so that's a new product development project for us. Being able to see inside the head with a sonolucent cranial plate that has been published on out of Cincinnati Children's by Dr. Sudhakar Vadivelu, where he was able to show under ultrasound the catheter flushing and the fluid coming out of the catheter inside the ventricles. That there's a lot of interest there, and so that's a development project we have, and there's a whole host of other things that we want to work on. But our model has been, we don't make shunts, we make them better. To steal the tagline from an old BASF commercial. And my point is that we don't have plans to make a whole hydrocephalus shunt. We just want to be the enabling technology to allow those really great products, really well-designed products, programmable, adjustable, fixed, et cetera. We want to enable those devices to do what they're supposed to do. And that means keeping the ventricular catheter patent. And then with EVDs, the same thing. We have no plans to make an external ventricular drain in the near future, but we'd like to help doctors and nurses in the ICU keep those systems patent so that they don't have to disconnect and reattach a new one and try to troubleshoot if the patient's not draining CSF. So that's been our model thus far, but really enabling technologies is probably the best way that I could describe it.
That's great. Yeah, it's definitely needed, particularly in shunts. So there are two final questions. I guess technically three, but this was interesting because you are yourself a patient. And a lot of patients that we kind of engage with, they're very, very active, super into advocacy, trying to do what they can and have some sort of a personal impact on their daily work with what they've experienced. So do you have any advice to give other patients who might seek that kind of personal connection to their work, which you clearly have done? How can they be as impactful in their fields as you have been?
Well, getting involved in medical device was my mother's idea. I wanted to be the IBM salesman when I was graduating in 1991. Thank you, Mom. It's been a calling, and the medical device business in general is, really rewarding. It changes all the time. So if you like change and you like new things happening all the time, it's a great business to be in. And you can contribute in a number of ways. You could be an engineer. I'm a commercial person, marketing and sales, but I have patents of my own in CSF management. There's lots of ways that you can contribute. Researchers, people who work in the lab at major institutions. They're not doctors, but they might have a master's or a PhD. Those types of things. There's all sorts of ways that you can contribute. My one piece of advocacy is if you're transitioning, away from home, away from your parents to college or a trade school, or wherever it is that you're going. Maybe you want to study abroad or go on a long European vacation or something like that. is to get a medical alert. This is something I've been really consistent about for about 25 years now, is to get a medical alert, because if you're a young person and you're high school aged or maybe in your early 20s and you're comatose because you have had a shunt malfunction and high intracranial pressure, the first thing the police are going to think when they show up and someone calls 911 is that it's drugs or alcohol. And that may add time to getting to the right diagnosis. If you have a medical alert and people see it and it says hydrocephalus on it and it has a VP shunt or whatever type of shunt you have, and a number that they can call, whether it's your parents or your neurosurgeon or somebody close, that is a great way to advocate for yourself as you're trying to get out and get on with your life.
Absolutely. I lied. I think I have two questions. So first, if there's someone listening to this either live or later, who maybe they're having those chronic occlusions and they're just frankly getting sick of it. I know plenty of people that do. How do they talk about this with their surgeon about a potential implantation?
I would ask them about it. A lot of good neurosurgeons, they understand that to remain valid and meaningful in this business, that it's not just going through med school and your residency. It's a lifetime of learning. And so, you are a team member with your neurosurgeon and that care team, maybe your physical therapist or family practitioner or whoever else is involved in your care. It's a team and you are an important part of that team. And so, you owe it to yourself, and your doctor should be willing to, if you printed something off of anybody's website, whether it's a programmable valve or it's the ReFlow from Anuncia Medical, that that you should be able to ask, hey, I've had multiple revisions from ventricular catheter occlusion. Am I a candidate for this technology? And be able to have that discussion. And most of the neurosurgeons that I know, and I know a lot of them, would be, ready, willing, and able to answer your questions in an educated manner to come up with the best program for you specifically.
Absolutely. That's great advice. And I guess as a final question, if someone had a specific question about the device, or if they talk to their doctor about it and their doctor is going to say, hey, how do I get in touch with these people? How would someone get in touch with you and kind of ask, or
Right.
whomever at Anuncia, to kind of learn a little bit more?
Yeah, go to the enunciamedical.com. There's a contact us section, and we check that every day. We also are pretty active on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. So, but if you wanted to get a question to us directly, we see them a lot lately with all of the social media and the clinical study that got published. People come through our website, and we've recently improved it to make it easier for you to contact us. So please use that as a method, and we will answer your question. We welcome them. It's nice to be able to see the fruits of the decade of work, and to talk to people about potentially helping them with what is a complex problem.
Yeah, this is great what you've done so far with this. It has the potential to really change a lot of people's lives and kids too.
We hope so.
This is great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you, Mr. Geiger, for working with us and having this session.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. This has been really great. I really appreciate it.